I am super pleased to be here today. I'm very excited to present the way I look at the outside world and try to make sense of it and how to respond to the ongoing changes. My name is Martin Schwirn. I am in the foresight field for a quarter century now. So my background is actually in quantitative research, but then I switched over at SRI International. The qualitative research was at a consultancy that focused on horizon planning, horizon scanning, and scenario planning. And now I'm, as you can see, foresight advisor for Business Finland. So let me try to share my presentation. I haven't really used this before, so here, present. So this doesn't, then let me see if I can. It doesn't let me share it. So this is, let me see if I can directly go to the slides. Be easier to spot. This is one you might even spot that there is a change going on, but you dismiss it because you think it's an inferior one. In my book, I go into detail about all the different developments, but you're clearly looking for something that is new, that is different, something you haven't seen before. The entire process is here to guide us from the external world to the corporate actions. So from the bottom, these are the areas you cannot change. It's the competitors, it's a new technology, it's perhaps a war that is erupting. So this is what you have to deal with. This is what you have to prepare for. But as you go through the different steps of, filtering out the data points that really indicate new developments, then to move over to identifying patterns, and we will talk about it, then to prioritizing the developments, and then to responding, you're actually going from the external environment to the corporate actions. You're going from what you can not influence but have to deal with to the decision making within your organization that's completely in your hand. And this is the idea from going from awareness, okay, there's something going on in the external environment, to the preparedness by making the strategic decisions that your corporation is prepared for the future. Okay, so you might ask, so why are we doing this exactly? Well, the the idea is to not um, reflex, not only have a reflex to react to a certain development, but actually to have the time to think it through. What does it mean for your business? Is this something you want to prepare with your partners? Perhaps you want to actually divest of a certain business area. Perhaps you discover the missing link to enter a new business. So let's say you discovered something in December of 2023. You have for the coming years an awareness gap. If you really have the early identification of the development, you might be ahead of your competitors, you might be ahead of the entire industry. So there is this awareness gap between you and your competitors that you can use as a competitive advantage. Um, Later on, at one point, the industry will be aware that there is something going on. At that stage, you still have the opportunities to shape relationships. Later on, at one point, everybody knows about it. So then you're late to the game. So either you catch up, or you actually are relegated to some niche markets that nobody else wants. But you can see the earlier you identify a market opportunity or threat, the easier it will be for you to find the position you want to be in, whereas at the end, competitors will determine where you belong. I'll give you an example of some of the developments. I use dated examples for the simple reason we don't have to argue about it. Will that really happen or how is it going on? So we have in 2011, we wrote robot representation. It is the idea was that robotics technology is becoming more pervasive and communicative. Academic and commercial players are developing a wide range of robotics technologies that will enable seamless interaction between robots and people. So we had examples from VGO and Anybots. They developed mobile teleconferencing robots. So those were little robots that would drive around in the office, and you could talk to the robot, and that would be a way to telecommute. Then we had Georgia Tech. They are still working on a program to understand how humans and robots can interact and communicate. So if I talk to myself, is that an order for the robot? Is it more that I'm thinking about what the next step will be? Is it a question? And the other way around, can the robot indicate to me, I do understand what you want, maybe with a green light, this is what I will do, or a yellow light perhaps, which indicates I actually have conflicting information. I'm not completely sure. And the last example is only one of many government programs at the time that combined robotics technologies and cloud computing. The idea was new at that time, um, essentially that a robot could upload information that's then available for other robots, or if a robot encounters something new in the real world, it could download information what this device is or what to do now. Um, if you grab one of these developments and you run with it, the danger is it could actually lead you astray because perhaps the owner of VGO is only a rich person who really loves the idea to work with robots. So then it's a pet project rather than a real business idea. Perhaps some of the research done at Georgia Tech is only a thesis, so a very theoretical, abstract approach. And the government projects might have been only an assumption that something can be done. Altogether, though, it indicates there is a madness to it. There's a method to the madness. So there are enough researchers and corporations out there that really work on this development. Meaning, if you remove one of these um, uh, abstracts, as I call them, so the data points, you still have a full pattern. You still get a signal of change that makes sense. So the whole is more than the sum of their parts. So here's an example of how this played out. We wrote about it in at SRI International in 2011, and then Baxter, Nightscope, and Pepper rolled out over time. Some of those don't exist anymore. Where I live, Nightscope, you can on the west coast of the United States, you can actually see the robot quite a bit. By now, you have a lot of technologies or a lot of companies that work on humanoid robotics. So you can see there was a very early indication. Hey, something might be going on, and over time, a lot of these robots unfolded. If you at the beginning had a good idea that this might be happening, you could put yourself in a situation to make use of the robots or to even develop your own business field around robots or become a partner of these robotic companies. The idea being you're there early, competitors actually have to fall behind. Now, how do you deal with this? You have all those different signals of change. The world is crazy and too much is going on. Well, you can plot them on the what I call the impact emergence matrix, and it's a fairly the process is very simple, but it is easy to communicate. People understand it, and it does the trick. At first, you think about what is the impact for your business and be open minded here. So it could be very obvious impact, or it could be something where you're going, seriously, that is so far outside of my industry, outside of what I'm trying to achieve, that will not affect me. So you have it from low impact to high impact, but you also have developments that are currently going on. It's right now happening, short term, which means you really have to respond to it because um, others are already working on it. Then you have areas that you monitor because maybe a certain type of technology or a legislation is missing to make this really work. And then you have areas that you would watch because they still need to come into fruition. Still need to be developed. So there might be a timeline of 5 to 10 years on the right side, whereas on the left it's 1 to 3 years. You can also think about it in terms of on the left side. You have low uncertainty. Well, that's funny future speak, you actually kind of know, you're certain, you understand what this is about. And on the right side, it's very speculative. So you have high uncertainty. You don't know if this market will ever emerge, if the technology will ever work, and so on. If you plot all the different developments on this area, you get clean buckets. On the left side, you get in the upper left corner developments that you need to respond to because it really clearly affects your business and it's currently doing so. In the center, you have areas that you should monitor because maybe there's something that will emerge over the next 2 or 3 years. And the outside, these are the watch areas where, yeah, maybe this is something in the future that we need to take into consideration. Right now, it does not matter that much. You see how it also expands the box because as you look outside in the future, developments are clearly more difficult to judge if there's high impact or low impact. So, but this graph really helps us make sense of it, and we will talk about it in more detail. I wanna indicate this is unfortunate that there's no animation because it usually starts out with that black swan that everybody talks about, the pandemic. And if you go back, though, you can see that there are a lot of different pandemics that we had before. Obviously, not to the degree that COVID was, and we also had a lot of indication of Gates, Bill Gates, and Fauci and others talking about the fear of a disease that could spread globally. So, what a lot of people say, well, that's a black swan. Nobody could, you know, expect such a development to happen. In fact, was a white swan. It was something that a lot of people had indicated. And here is where my spiel comes from: awareness to preparedness. So in 2012, the European Commission had a publication that discussed the an infectious disease. It was done as a comic book, so to speak. But the comic book described the disease that moved from animals to humans, that emerged from China, spread globally via international travel. It then even highlighted that it required the use of masks and social distancing and resulted in the avoidance of public transportation, which in turn led to widespread clinical depression. In a way, I mean, this is 8 years before it happened. It clearly outlined what could happen. It was obviously, just a possibility. It was not predicting the future, but you see how it actually captured the information. It, but it indicated also that although many people were aware, the preparedness was falling short. Now, with a global event like a pandemic, that can be very challenging. But during the time, everybody also moved towards just in time, really quick adaptive management. Nobody had the resources to build up additional factories, additional pathways to deliver products, and so on. So clearly, more could have been done. This is the overview of how to spot signals of change. Let me now try to switch to generative AI, which hopefully works a bit better. And maybe I can actually make the um, animation work. which so this does not work. That is unfortunate that this program doesn't allow me. So it is uploading. Very good. So now let's take what we learned about how to spot signals of change and apply our knowledge to generative AI. I will not go into the details of this presentation, but I want to give you an idea how we use this information and then develop an early on idea how the future might develop. So, first of all, this entire generative AI, we actually, so my team at SRI International had already written about some of the aspects in 2006. So essentially, maybe 16 years before it really happened. And at that time, we said automation climbing the value chain. Then later on, MIT researchers actually released the book Race Against the Machine, where they made clear how that information can be how new systems can take over middle class jobs, and then in 2019 we had a couple of examples how Microsoft used was able to create caricatures of people. There was a software program. We had at Rutgers University a professor using AI to generate art, and perhaps the one that's the most obvious, the way chat GPT later on was used. MIT had a software program that allowed the program to go out, look up a research paper, get the important pieces of information, and even transfer it into something that layman can understand. So you see, there are a lot of the the elements, how to combine or how to use artificial intelligence to create art, to create pictures, to create text. And then in 2020 we had Chat GPT or GPT-3, and that later on rolled out by OpenAI until we're at the stage in 2023 where you had dozens of companies developing AI, and the entire infrastructure of Nvidia making a lot of money because they have the AI chips. So again, we have an early indication that this is going on, and perhaps 2006 was a little bit too speculative, but certainly by 2019 it was clear that something is happening in the field, that researchers working on it, companies are working on it, and people are starting to use it for certain applications. A quick stepping back, and I don't want to go too much in the details, but what is the big deal about generative AI, since we had already a lot of the artificial intelligence systems? But in the past, what you needed to do, you needed to completely understand what this is about. And if you worked in the field, you might have done research on robotics. And if you discovered something new, then that was not usable for somebody who was in the field of pharmaceutical discovery, let's say. So it was very limited. You might have had thousands of different researchers working on different silos, and they could not really communicate and exchange information. But now with generative AI, you can actually, so the large language models allow you to share information. So I'm discovering something in robotics, well, you can use it in pharmaceutical now. So the exchange is much easier, which means instead of having 1,000 people in 1,000 silos, you suddenly have 1,000 researchers working on generative AI in general. And this also explains why we're suddenly seeing this crazy explosion of new applications and improvements. And another area which is either really cool or either really scary, and I leave it up to you to decide where you fall on the spectrum, are emerging capabilities. So the capability of generative AI to suddenly do something that it was never programmed to do so. So it popped up initially when you with translation programs, and I'm picking an example. I can't remember what the real one was, from French to English, let's say, and the system got better and better, acquired more information from the internet by itself, and suddenly was able to translate Farsi. Well, that was not planned, that was not programmed, but suddenly the system was able to do this. So you could see this is a very exciting, because suddenly the system can do something that was unexpected. On the other hand, it's also scary in the way, what does this mean? So what kind of capabilities will these systems acquire over time? This is why generative AI suddenly became a very interesting topic, whereas artificial intelligence kind of was around for 50 years to one degree or another. And the majority of the business community really didn't care that much about it. Okay, let's run through a couple of aspects, and I will give you a signal of change at the end of each of these little segments. We will talk about what that looks like on the impact emergence chart, and how we were able to, just make sense of all the different developments. I will here give a little bit of a longer explanation with this particular one, but then as we roll down, I will um, become a little bit quicker. So these are the regulatory aspects. Here's AI's employment disruption has begun. It talks about artificial intelligence is starting to replace some middle class jobs. Predictions for future developments are dire. Will such a future come to pass? We will also have a more positive example later on. But here it was one German newspaper actually deciding, well, we can lay off some people. Then there was the prediction that 27% of jobs are at high risk from AI, and then also an indication that these language models are now actually testing very high in the original creative thinking tests. So, which means it's not only general jobs we think about; it's also something that a lot of people think is very unique to humans, is creativity. And I understand it's a depends on how you define creativity, but nevertheless, there is a clear indication AI is um, starting to affect employment. But it also has a lot of unintended side effects. So generative AI is showing surprising use cases and unexpected side effects, such as leaking data or dividing language regions. So one of the side effects was that suddenly, because the system went into emails and got information out of that for training purposes, there was actually established a pathway to leak confidential information. So that was something people might have expected, but um, it was something nobody was prepared for. Another issue is that, for instance, because if you use so many English sources, does that mean that English will now become by far the dominant language, and all the smaller language regions will actually have a competitive disadvantage? Again, something that perhaps was not as obvious when you started out thinking about generative AI. Uh, Plagiarism and royalties. Obviously, people talked about it. Over the course of 2023, many artificial intelligence derived artworks emerged. It appears that AI repurposed art and creative works from human artists. So, by going out there, and I mean, if you use some of the model, you can For instance, they give me the photo of a or the image of a dog chasing a balloon and do this as Liechtenstein or um, Monet or Dali and make it look like the way they would have drawn it. You could also use real music from, let's say, just the catalog from Taylor Swift, plug it into the system and tell the system, give me a song that sounds similar. So it becomes very close to the style of Taylor Swift. But does it mean now it's a plagiarism? It's actually a new song, but nevertheless, obviously, her catalog was used. So you can see this becomes very complicated. It will require some regulatory actions. And then authorities finally started to tackle AI, governments and authorities. Many countries develop guidelines, policies, and regulations. This will take a time. It's their initial efforts, but we first need to understand where this development is going. So, what I do now, again, as we said before, the impact emergence chart. Here it's about the economy as a whole. This is not as strong as if it's your own company, because then you know exactly what the impact will be and what the timeline would be. Here I'm just more general, trying to make sense, spread it out so you see the side effects rather on the right side, and the plagiarism and royalties are something to monitor because it is to a certain degree already happening. So this is an idea to get certain aspects of generative AI and then spread it out. Let's move on. This is a commercial aspect. AI as a feature. Companies are taking first steps to embed AI in consumer products. So Adobe has used it, Amazon is using AI models, and so on. So everybody's now trying to actually get the technology to the front end or even inside of software products, um, enhancing their service offer. Supercharges product development. This is clear for design, but it's also in pharmaceuticals, materials research, and so on. AI can help you to perhaps not find the best design or find the new medication, but it can narrow down the number of potential candidates for a certain application. And then you would have to go, obviously, through the discipline of looking at it, investigating it, and testing the designs or the pharmaceuticals. Nevertheless, it there is a speeding up of product development. So the cycles have become shorter. The world will be faster and more uncertain. It changes businesses. AI is starting to change the way businesses operate, for better or for worse. So, for better, perhaps in logistics, there might be more adaptive applications. For worse, perhaps, again, depending on your attitude, in HR, where a lot of the systems are using the algorithms to extract worthwhile um, resumes for a certain job application, which then leads to the issue. Well, if you actually a little bit outside of the expectations of AI, does it mean nobody's looking at it anymore, or does it mean, well, because now we're actually using sophisticated AI instead of just word search, you have a better chance? You see how suddenly a lot of the operational aspects will be changed by AI. Here's a counter argument to losing jobs. AI will need a lot of support. An entire ecosystem of human developers, programmers, service providers will cater to the proliferation of AI applications. In part because AI actually needs information from humans to make sense of the world. But then you need somebody who's curating it. You need somebody to design products that embed AI, and then obviously you need to work with your customers to adjust the process. These are higher end jobs. It also means that some of the um, lower end applications. I just see that there is an issue potentially. I hope everybody can see the PowerPoint. Um, okay, and then again, I do the same thing. I look at the impact, emergence or uncertainty chart and spread it out. The product feature, that's already happening. There's no question about it. It's currently ongoing. The support jobs I put on the right side. It's I think very speculative that suddenly it would increase, get more jobs or better jobs because of AI. But there is the potential out there, so we should take that into consideration. So then, the creativity race, the societal aspect. You see how I split up the world in different areas. AI is affecting an area that until recently was seen as relatively immune to algorithmic automation. Can creativity be automated? And it's obviously an ongoing question. What is creativity? Is it only a human trait? I To be honest, I would say there is a spectrum that ranges from low key, perhaps creativity, where you're sorting, a PowerPoint presentation. Most of us are not experts in PowerPoint. Most of us are not designers, so I'm not sure if AI gives me a presentation, there is a good chance that it will look as good as the one I'm developing. But on the other hand, you obviously have artists, you have people who really work with the medium, who can convey information in a very intuitive way, adjusted for humans, build in the element of surprise. I think this is then high end creativity. And I would say that currently AI is maybe on the lower spectrum, and the question will be how far it ever can go. Nevertheless, obviously, there's the question, misinformation in overdrive. So you have hallucinations where the system clearly gives you wrong information because it couldn't find anything out there, so they make it up. But on the other hand, it's also easier to plug in information. I am now able to, adjust certain, use celebrities, use their words, change them, put them in a different environment. So misinformation and disinformation obviously will benefit, if that is benefit is the right term here, by this development. It will become more difficult in the long run to distinguish what is real, what is fact, and what is opinion or what is actually propaganda. So we need to develop the education around it. And you might end up with complete toxic internet dump sites where you have a lot of photos, a lot of movies that are ethically problematic. It includes disinformation, but it also includes revenge porn. I mean, you can go nuts if you just think about how easily you could create uh, all types of media, photos, sound, what have you, combine them in certain ways, then use it to bribe people or to use it to let competitors appear in a bad light. So there's a lot out there that we really have to think about where this might be going, and then what would be the guardrails, what would regulation do, and how can individuals and companies respond if they identify, oh, there's something going on that I have not said, for instance. And there are different views on the AI, from downright dangerous, if Sky is it Skynet, the Terminator system. So from downright it will destroy civilization as we know it, to oh, this is the pathway to the 2 hour workday, 8 hours work week, and we will all be only attending to the AI, and the AI will provide us with all the information and all the products and services we crave. The truth will be somewhere in between, but obviously we will have to monitor over the next years in which direction this is moving. Again, putting this out on the different, on the impact uncertainty chart. Misinformation, for instance, I put on the left. That's happening. There's no doubt about it. The views I put on the right. and the impact would be high if we find out this is really dangerous. Then obviously um, we require to um, to do something about it. The question is, can we still go back and reel it back in? Nevertheless, impact could be high. It's also very speculative. At this stage, we really don't know what will happen over the years. So now let's put this all together, all the different aspects, regulatory, commercial, and societal. And you see which are the areas perhaps society or the economy should already respond to, and what are the areas that you should monitor and perhaps watch out for. Um, I will later on with the metaverse use this too. This is already a certain connection to what Rome talked about before with scenario planning, because now you have a little bit of a timeline, you have an understanding what the impact can be, and actually you kind of separated out this different aspects of generative AI. Whereas before it was this big area of, oh my God, what is going on? There's so many developments. Now we kind of put it in this case in 12 different signals of change, nice buckets where we can say, it appears there's something going on with jobs, there's something going on with misinformation. Hey, art and plagiarism could be an issue, and so on. You can see how we spread it out to make it easier to actually talk about the different aspects. That is the idea of using signals of change to early on perhaps also find a language how to tackle new developments. Okay, let me now move to the last presentation that is on the metaverse, where I have even moved a little bit further and spelled out uncertainties that then can be used in scenario planning. Um, Again, I'm struggling here a little bit with the upload. Always takes a bit. So it's uploading. Again, the first part of the presentation was about giving you an overview. The second part with generative AI guides us over to actually find some patterns and signals of change. But now we actually want to go a step further and understand what is happening and how you would work with it as a company. It's still processing to upload the information. I apologize for this. Still processing. I assume this is because it is a bigger file. Okay, we should. Oh, I see it here, but I can't. Here we go. Making sense of the metaverse, signals of change, and how to identify uncertainties. So you might have heard about the metaverse. I actually was at South by Southwest over the past 3 years, running some panels related to the topic. The idea of using virtual elements or augmented elements and put them either in the context of glasses so that you have additional information for fun purposes, entertainment, or for industrial purposes or military purposes. Like always, it actually goes quite back quite some time. The change is that it has become cheaper and it's more readily available. But the technology started years ago. So we have here's an example of NASA in 1990 virtual interface environment workstation view it was called, and you already see that they even had haptic gloves, but they clearly have that headset. I mean, it was massive. It was really heavy. But the idea was there to essentially be able to combine virtual information in the headset. So this is clearly virtual. On the right side, from 2004, 20 years ago, Fraunhofer had a net attack, and that was augmented reality, actually not unlike what Pokemon Go did maybe 6 years ago. So you had this reactor that was projected on your screen in the wild, and you were able to run around, catch this reactor, destroy the reactor, and there were teams that were playing against each other. What you can't see is this gentleman actually not only has this helmet with a camera and everything, but also an entire backpack because the equipment was so heavy. Nevertheless, the idea was there. There's no, in general, the virtual and the augmented part were clearly there quarter century ago. Then in the 2010s, we had actually a lot of different applications of virtual environments. We had Hatsude Miku in Japan, and you see this is essentially a comic book character, but she was on stage and singing in front of a crowd. We had concerts by Whitney Houston and the late Tupac Shakur. These were again holographic applications. I think technically it wasn't holographic, but nevertheless, that you could put on stage. Obviously, brings up issues. So who has the rights to these images and the songs? It became a little bit of an issue with a Johnny Walker commercial that used Bruce Lee, because a lot of people said, well, Bruce Lee was a teetotaler. Others said, no, he was not. And I leave it up to experts that know about martial arts and Bruce Lee. But nevertheless, you see the issue. You can suddenly use somebody who has no chance to defend and protect him or herself, and put words in his or her mouth, or you can use these celebrities as a spokesperson. Now, one that I found a bit interesting was Iguchi Aimi from the Japanese band AKB 48. It's essentially a girl group, and they had, I don't know, 6 members. And there was a new member, and this new member was presented, and the audience got all excited. And it turned out that she was a composite of all the others. So it was not a real person, it was a composite that was delivered as if she is a new member, which already guides us a little bit over to the commercial applications, but also to, well, what is real, what is misinformation, what are the issues. Again, this was in this was 13 years ago. So you see, this actually goes a little bit back. There's a growing market of what they call the celebrities. So celebrities that died. This is actually the website of a company that offers you the use of these celebrities, that then, I don't know who, I assume that the estate will get some of the money. But clearly, we're entering a little bit of a different world here. In the 20s, we had a spread out of those applications. So let's start with the right side. These are virtual models, and there's an entire industry now developing around the modeling. It takes over from real models in certain situations, for the simple reason these these models won't get tired, and these models never have a bad attitude, and these models actually are not charging as much money. I just read a couple of articles that point out that influencers on Instagram and YouTube are now facing a similar situation, that a lot of virtual personas are taking over. And then we have in certain, particularly in the Asian realm right now, but it's already spreading over, where people interact with virtual boyfriends and girlfriends. So you see this entire world is actually shifting towards perhaps accepting virtual representations as real life, or as possibilities with whom you can interact in real life. My Heritage has had an animation where you could upload a photo of one of your ancestors, and it would animate the photo, so it would appear as if your grandmother is actually looking at you and moving around. We had Deep Tom Cruise. This person admits, I'm not Tom Cruise. I just pretend to be Tom Cruise. This is satire, and that's why he gets away with it. But go on the website, as some of the examples are hilarious, but they also indicate how easy it is to fake somebody's look, somebody's way of interacting with the public. Interestingly enough, Tom Cruise was actually, the real Tom Cruise was actually ahead already like 10, 15 years ago. He said, well, any digital image that you have from me, either you have to destroy after the shoot or you have to hand out to me, because he was very aware that if this is floating around, it makes it easier to, use him as a stand-in, or perhaps in the future even make an entire movie with him, just without the real Tom Cruise. And then there was something that I thought was interesting. I put it in because it goes away from the visual, it's more the sound. In 21, the song I Miss You by Kim Kwang Seok um, uh, was published. This artist died in 96. So what they did, they essentially uploaded the song and let the algorithm determine how this um, artists would have interpreted the song. So, on the one hand, I find it very interesting that there is the idea, hey, I can use sound and I can give you a representation of what he might have thought the song should sound like. On the other hand, again, it brings up a lot of issues regarding plagiarism, and also what is then real art and what is just you know re remanufactured art, so to speak. So there were already clear implications even in 2015 that there is the opportunity to have recurring revenue generation, that there are issues regarding brand authenticity and integrity, intellectual property concerns, no question, and misuse and abuse is a clear concern. But this also shifts over to societal implication, because revenue sharing and ownership becomes an issue. What if somebody uses my, nobody will use my likeness, I assume, but once you have become known in a certain field, what prevents somebody to use you for promoting products and so on? Personal authenticity. This could even be, I'm sending over some images of, or some videos of somebody I know to you. Would you know that's the real person or not? There are clearly privacy concerns, and there's criminal exploitation. So criminals are already using fake voice via the phone system to tell family members, hey, I got kidnapped, please send this money. And it sounds like, oh my God, something is really happening. Whereas the real daughter or son walking around in a shopping mall. So you can see how this is an issue of concern. So this was actually a document I wrote in February of 21. I thought AI, um, augmented reality and virtual reality is getting to the point that it actually should find use in a current commercial applications. Again, not predicting the future, but just lining out, hey, there's a possibility that this is now ready for the big time. And in September 21, we had three examples that I like. The one is ABBA having a concert with their avatars that still look young. This was mixed. It was on a stage, and you had real musicians, but you also had the members of this music group. Then there was virtual. Now Meta, at the time Facebook, introduced their system how to interact virtually, and obviously, as we know now, in October of 21, they changed their name from Facebook to Meta platforms to indicate, hey, we're making the shift now to this new metaverse world. And the Carolina Panthers had an example where if you looked through your smartphone, you could see a panther jumping around in the stadium, which is augmented. And I just put this out because I think it's very nice to see what the mix, the virtual and the augmented part is. Here we have a couple of examples from 22, March 22, South by Southwest. We had Leslie Shannon talking about spatial computing and that it is essentially the marriage of the physical and um, the virtual. We had Geoff Bunt from software, the head of software for Vario. They do the headsets. Vesa Koivuma, who is the head of growth in Wärtsilä, which is a shipping company. So he's a user of the technology and says, "Hey, the metaverse, that's a tool, and we can use it." And Mika Rosendahl, the CEO of So On, that's a metaverse company, and he said it's the next and the final evolutionary state of the whole humankind. So you see how it ranges from the pragmatic, there's a combination to this, I see a completely different world emerging. So I wanted to throw this out because there are different perspectives, and where you stand, you will think about the metaverse differently, but you will also use potential applications differently. There's obviously a fun side. So there is Course. I think that's how the artist is pronounced. Where a certain, in this case, an elephant is just put above the space of a city, and if you have the application, you can see this elephant floating around. Then you had actually a virtual fashion company that since has been purchased by Nike. So these are sneakers and shoes that exist only in the virtual space but can be purchased there. And I used one that was actually a little bit of an older example, but I found it very interesting. So Aibo, that little robotic dog that could jump around and interact with the users, you were able to download virtual dog food on your phone and pretend to give it in the bowl. Obviously, there was nothing in the bowl, but the dog would come running in the indicating, "Oh, I see that you are putting food in my bowl." That is a very interesting way of how you would interact with a virtual um, element, a virtual food in this case, with something that is in the real world. So I thought that was a unique way. Obviously, use for marketing and use it for in immersive landscapes, in architecture, or for educational experiences. All the good stuff, so to speak. Then you clearly have it in the military. The military already in 21 spent a lot of money on the HoloLens and Microsoft's offer for the simple reason, if you can project in the field of view where certain armies are on the horizon and what the different conditions of the area are, yeah, you get a very intuitive feel how this could be strategically or tactically used. Therefore, clearly, the army is spending a lot of money on it. Well, but you also have the industrial side. So field workers can look at stuff and send information and photos up into the cloud. Or here's an example where somebody looks at a device and gets a clear indication, hey, you need to move, for instance, this part out of the way to then exchange the other part. So it makes it easier because you could even use people who are perhaps not even experts to guide them through the process of maintaining equipment or even fixing equipment. So you could imagine that IKEA could have something that clearly indicates you need to put it here together and then you turn it around. In this context, a lot of the information is related to the digital twin, where you have complete virtual representation of your factory, of your device, of your machine. Um, then also, and again, this goes a little bit back, but we will talk about it a little bit more in detail. There are issues, again, with having signals of change regarding real estate rights. So, in augmented environments, what happens if I put some information above your house? and I'm saying, well, the person who lives in this house is a moron because I don't like you. Are you allowed to do this? I mean, it's obviously not physically above my house, but now everybody who has the app and walks by can see this. Are you squatting on my house? What is going on? An early example, this goes back to BP when they had the oil leak, was an artist. If you would if the software would see that there is a BP logo, it would essentially put that oil spill on top of that logo. Again, I mean, it's a nifty idea for an artist, but you can see how this potentially is an issue for your brand and for your logo and the way you present yourself in the marketplace. On the right side, clearly privacy issues. Suddenly, all the different information can be used, will be used. Data will become more intuitive. If you have headsets, the system has to know which direction you're looking at in order to make sense of it. But that information can also be used to see, oh, you're interested in that product. So you can see how suddenly the way you interact in virtual space becomes a completely new field of market research. And then there are different layers of information that could become problematic. So you could, for instance, have an application where you sign up. It's like Yelp restaurant, what kind of food, and you would look through your smart glasses, your headset, or simply through your smartphone, and it would indicate what kind of food they have and what the ranking is. But you could also imagine, well, suddenly you use a different app and it would tell you, well, it's not about the menu, it's about that building and the real estate value and when it got sold the last time. It could also mean that with a different service, I get the criminal record of the owner of that building. So you can see suddenly you can slice and dice the world much more intuitively than is currently available. You have a lot of headsets that by now is outdated, but you see, it's smart glasses, it's headsets, it's new display technologies, and this is only proliferating as we move closer to new applications. But I want to highlight that perhaps is only one aspect of the entire metaverse. You can have a wide range of different applications. So I start left upper corner and then clockwise. So Apple showed us how you can use voice interaction with something that for most people was mainly a visual medium. So you just talk to the system. You can imagine you can talk to Metaverse and get then information. You can use holographics. You can use certain types of sound. Imagine that certain sound would guide you through a city, or sound would indicate, oh, there's a park on the right. You would hear some ducks walking, and you have on the left side maybe a train passing by. So this is where the train station is. Then you have certain types of clothes that integrate interface technologies. You have haptic vests that literally give you pushes and jolts as you use the device. It's mainly for gaming currently, but you can see how this also can find use in industrial applications. And then we have Neuralink. So this is Elon Musk's approach of implanting chips, where at least theoretically in the future you will access the metaverse with your thoughts. Some of the application I want to highlight it because sometimes you're reading and you're going, that's kind of crazy. There is a mask out there that can actually restrict your ability to breathe, and that sounds first like, well, that's a nasty gaming application, but it's used for firefighters if they go in a room and virtually they would see maybe not the smoke, but perhaps there's carbon monoxide in there, and suddenly there's less air coming through. So it has a lot of training applications. Think about it. There's a lot of industrial uses for people who really need to feel how an environment smells affects you and your mobility. So this goes beyond the entertainment, obviously, towards the industrial side. So what are the uncertainties? And I again I spelled this out using the same method I used initially for generative AI. I just took it the next step by really making sense of what are the different pathways, which then indicates actually goes back to what Rome talked before. This is then a way where you could construct certain uh, scenarios. So, a regulatory environment, will this become a legal maze where we essentially everything is regulated, new applications are difficult to put into the world? Or is it a wild west similar to the way the internet started out? Everything goes, and then regulatory side is always two steps behind. Then we have the societal level. So obviously, misinformation vortex. You can't even distinguish anymore what is real and what is not. Or will it become the knowledge carrier of the future, the library, the educator, the university, where everybody can learn about new developments? A commercial structure. Multiverse or metaverse. We will talk about this a little bit. Essentially, metaverse is one environment where everybody can go in, or it's multiverse, different platforms, and nothing really connects. And then on an individual level, are we talking about the social hopes that it improves us and our efforts? Or is it social concerns? Suddenly we only become a cog in the machine, and it's very difficult for us to to interact with this new world. And I will provide example as we go through the presentations. I will have the signals of change that I extracted from the environment using the method we talked about at the beginning. So first, it's a crowded field. So there are a lot of there's Microsoft, and there's obviously Meta, but there's also spatial and Upland and a wide range of companies that work on digital twins that are very industrial, that have entertainment value, that want to have alternative life. So it is a complex world to navigate if you want to become a user, a customer of this world, but also a partner. Um, then here, I just want to mention that there are differences between the metaverse and the multiverse. If you have a world where everything connects, you certainly will build your business in a different way than if you have, let's say, Meta's platform and Microsoft's platform, and those two are absolutely separate. So does it mean you focus on one of those platforms, or do you want to be in both of those platforms? And then obviously, since there are more companies, could it be that in Japan, for instance, none of these platforms works, and you have to go maybe on the Nintendo platform? So suddenly, the world can look very different if everything combines or if everything separates. Then you have a situation, there is a conflict between the different types of metaverse. On the left side, I gave a list of commercial and industrial applications, from digital twin to conference environment to the sales platform. And on the right side, I just put, well, my kids do at home, Minecraft and Roblox and the different worlds. Now, if you have a world where this could combine, so you could envision that perhaps the shopping platform has a outlet in Minecraft, because you could, you know, purchase different, I don't know, clothes, weapons, and so on. That makes sense. But you have very distinct purposes, and they could create a conflict. So, whereas in the entertainment world, one of the goals might be to steal an object or to defeat the competing party. If you steal blueprints in the real world, in teleconferencing applications, industrial applications, that's obviously a crime. Now, if we make it entertainment and we make it industrial, then perhaps it is clear. But what happens if those two areas merge to a certain degree? What kind of rules would apply where? What kind of behavior is defensible in one environment but perhaps not in the other? So you can see this needs also a lot of adjustment on the part of the users. So here are the legalities. I already talked about it. I talked about the issues between different types of um, applications. There are privacy concerns. There are the concerns: what kind of information should I be able to access? We already see in some environments street crimes such as tagging and also more nasty interactions with other users. Then we have the question: is real estate squatting in the real world? Is that okay? But then really technical issues. So since this is in the virtual world, what is the jurisdiction? Who can determine what is legal and what is not legal? Which country's law is applying? And this sounds on the surface like, well, somebody will have to figure this out, but this can really take a while. So to give an example with the internet and e-commerce, there was the question: so should states be able to collect sales tax? Because technically this is in the virtual space, so maybe it's not really sales on the ground of the state. Over the years, Amazon and other e-commerce platforms decided, yes, you can actually collect sales taxes. The legal decision to decide, yes, you can do that, that was in 2018. So we're talking essentially 25 years after Amazon sold their first products. So you can see this entire environment will be very unclear for quite some time to come, not only because it will have to go through the courts, it is also a moving target. As one decision is made, new applications will emerge. So legality will be a problematic consideration. Tale of Two Cities, which on the one hand, this is clearly, I remember the world where you didn't really have the all the information on the internet. I had to go to libraries, and some libraries didn't have all the different magazines and trade journals, so you needed to drive to a different city, find the magazine there, then make a copy, and that it obviously has changed. So the knowledge acquisition has become so much easier. But we also have seen over the past 10 years, particularly over the past 5 or 6 years, that mis and disinformation is massive, and it clearly moves over to propaganda, where other states. Actors are trying to influence even elections. So you have the positive and you have also very negative sides. And where the metaverse lands, that again is a matter of seeing how this world could play out. It could also become a conduit for empathy, something that if you read about it, perhaps it's not that obvious, but if you get immersed in this world, you will better understand what the issues are about. So I put together four of them because I found they were really interesting. New Realities VR film Tree essentially puts you into the perspective of a tree in the tropical forest, to indicate the relevance this tree has for all the other living beings, for diversity of the jungle, and so on. So it brings essentially an environmental aspect much closer to you. Then there was a giant, was a representation of a family that was in, and this was before Ukraine, not that people think there was a connection. People that were in a war zone, and the family went into the basement and was essentially trying to comfort the children and so on. And while you had the glasses on, you would see the dust coming down, and you would hear the bombs, you would feel shaking if you had the right applications. So just to get a much better um, way access pathway to feel what these people have to go through. Sea-Watch was not a virtual reality. This was in a real pool, but you could see how this could find use in virtual reality. The idea was all the migrants who are going over the Mediterranean, what it would feel like at night in cold water in a boat that is has 16, 20 people, although the boat is only good for six passengers, to provide a visceral understanding. This is a dangerous world for them. And afterwards, there was research, and everybody who participated was going, well, now it was clear that it is not a joyride, but now I do understand what people actually have to go through. And on the last one was an example that I thought was interesting. It was about a missing girl from '73, and the police just had this cold case. And what they were trying to achieve is to get um, the public more engaged. And in order to do so, they put it on Twitter. They essentially provided the last 2 days of what happened on Twitter. So yeah, it's almost like a live stream, but on Twitter, so that people could remember, yeah, wait, I actually, that's right, I was walking around and I saw this car. And you might then have information, but that car actually had a dent in the back, and they would put that information in there so that then additional people could find additional information. So it helped the police department. In the end, it was actually a DNA test that led to the murderer of that poor girl. It can also help you with more applications. So in for training, it can help you to train nurses to, it's one thing to have sympathy, it's another thing to have empathy. So sympathy is kind of the understanding, yes, that hurts. Empathy is like you feel it yourself. So you develop a better understanding what you actually are doing to patients. Police is using VR to get a better understanding what are the different situations you could be in. So is, for instance, a homeless person attacking you because there is the intent of aggression, or is it because of a mental disability, that there's just a different perception? So it is not a dangerous person. It's just a person that requires a certain way to deal with. That is very difficult to go through unless you have ways to not only see the different scenarios, but also to be able to measure what happened with you and then go back again and train the same situation. How would you behave? And the last one is an example from a university where they develop products and services for the poor in India. And again, VR was used to essentially first set the stage that people understand what the challenges are, and then the students would come up with ideas and products and services how to help these people. So I think people can criticize VR, but it can also help us to understand others and bring us closer together. Well, the other side, it's a disaster in the making, and just added up a whole bunch of articles that talked about social media, how problematic that has been. Also, there is an example of the um, dirty dozen. It's a type of misinformation that spread on the internet, and then when researchers went back, it was a dozen people that were able to essentially spread their message so wide that most of the internet users became aware of it. Clearly, propaganda has become an issue. Um, by now even intelligence services around the world are trying to make sense of it. So, you know, can bring us closer together. It also has the potential to really separate us and develop a polarized society. For students, it could become a carrier of information that helps not only understanding the technical facts, but also get a better feeling to understand what happened, to retain that information and do it in a visceral and perhaps even entertaining way. So imagine if you're actually at Apollo 11 and next to you sits Neil Armstrong and he's describing what's going on and that they currently have issues to find a good landing spot, and you're sitting there. That clearly would make it much easier for you to retain all the different bits and pieces of information and to understand what kind of achievement it was. Reporters Without Borders created in Minecraft the uncensored library. So, meaning in countries where there's censorship, people can go into this world of Minecraft and literally get access to articles that they wouldn't be able to get in their country. SciArc and the Fraunhofer do something similar, but on a different scale. SciArc is digitally recording the pyramids and all the great achievements and cultural heritage of different countries. They also have a copy of the two Buddhas in Afghanistan that unfortunately got destroyed. And the Fraunhofer does something similar, going through museums and taking 3D representations of the artwork. Now you can see, once you have all the information, you can actually feed it into an environment where you might be able to go into the ancient Babylon or live with the Mayas and experience what the world looked like, and also feed into it all the new insights, all the new informations that research is giving you. So clearly a completely different approach to education, to training, to understanding, and also to feed new information, new research into a depository. Clearly very positive. But again, we have the situation of real, fake, and the in between, and that goes beyond, the Tom Cruise. That is the picture actually of this person who changes his looks to Tom Cruise. But you have over time digital twins that are currently in factories used, and they are in secure environments, one hopes. But this will actually spread down to your home environment. But if there is a virtual representation, everybody can hack your system and then open um, maybe the gas line, maybe start the heating system, maybe open the doors, unlock the doors. So you can see a lot of mayhem can happen if you access this environment. Then the city of Seoul, for instance, wants to put all their civil services online, so that if you applied, let's say, for a new driver's license, you would actually go in the metaverse to that booth and say, well, here's my information. Um, Please apply for a new driver's license. But imagine you would have an entire environment, a copy of this metaverse of Soul, but it's a spoof. So you're in there, you give all your private information, but it's actually not to the city of Seoul. It's actually to an individual that is collecting this information for nefarious purposes. So it makes it simply more difficult to distinguish what is real, what is unreal. Can I trust a certain person, perhaps even an entire organization? There is obviously a lot going on how to think about the metaverse for the future. Again, this is essentially trying to separate the different aspects. And as Rome said before, with scenario building, you could just, for instance, imagine a world that is Wild West on a regulatory issue and has a lot of misinformation for instance, and a multiverse. Whereas there could be a legal maze where you focus on the knowledge carrier and misinformation is somewhat restricted, but it's also very difficult to create a business in this world because it's so difficult to put something online, but also for people to interact and access that information. It's one way to really think about, oh, where would I be in one of these worlds? Is there perhaps a business model, service, or product that works across all the different possibilities for the future? Uh, Quick look at players and contestants. They are getting more by the day. But I think what's interesting about it is there are some that really think about it as in terms of the next internet. So this is the world where we will interact with. Then there's clearly gaming, and obviously that is very cool application. Some people think actually about something that's almost more like an alternative life, and perhaps Second Life, if you remember this from 15 years ago, still around, is perhaps somewhere in between gaming and developing an alternative life. And then finally, you have industrial drivers that really focus on how to get supply chain partners, industrial application, commercial applications into a representation into the virtual world to make it easier to simulate, new logistics concepts and so on, and then also to use it to directly operate the real environment. um this usually unfolds, so I'm sorry that there is no animation. But in the end, you also want to think a little bit about where you are. So you could be, it's obviously in real life, virtual reality, augmented reality, but you could also have a world where you have offers that are in real life but use augmentation or virtual elements. So, for instance, some museums are starting to have virtual elements where you can have a headset or a sound walk around and would give you a virtual idea what is happening in natural sciences or war museums. So I went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and they had some of those aspects. And then obviously you could have a complete fusion where you have complete virtual elements, augmented applications, and layers that look at the real world. And you can use this for productivity, clearly, the industrial commercial space, for entertainment, gaming applications, music, and so on, concerts, and then unfortunately also fake environments. In all of them, you will find spaces where you can develop a business. In fake environments, I would hope that you're not going the criminal route, but you obviously could provide a certain authentication solutions or protections against fake environments about criminal against criminal behavior. So you see, it's essentially whatever you think when people say this is what the metaverse and virtual applications will be. Really think about what people thought the internet will be 30 years ago. It was just really almost naive looking back. Yeah, there will be information, and but the internet has become essentially the fabric that glues together a lot of our interactions commercially and in entertainment and personal levels. So think about that the metaverse will be much more than we currently can envision. Here's a different way to look at it. All the different dots could be market areas that you could actually become active in. Again, and maybe you decide I actually only want to do AR applications for productivity solutions and leave everything else to other people. And then obviously divvy up the supply chain. Again, think about the internet, how many different companies you have designing interfaces, equipment, software, services, helping people. Yelp trying to make sense of all the information. So you see where this is going. There is a lot of different potential out there. Here's something that I I stumbled upon and I like because it might guide your thinking where you are, and it gets back to my initial bubble of business, industry, and environment. And it really depends on what you think the business you're in. So I found a representation of the metaverse that has 7 layers, from experience to creator economy, spatial computing, and so on. So devices, applications, services. That is a nice overview, but then I found on the other hand one that has a different number of layers. So, which means either in one way, layers were collapsed, or in a different way, layers were separated, or it's completely different layers. The problem is the layer you believe you're in determines who you are. And you should be very careful to say, well, I'm actually not in this particular industry. What I am doing is just this particular segment. Because your competitor might have a completely different look and say, well, I'm actually in the bigger bubble. And suddenly this competitor sees you as a competitor. You think this is a company I shouldn't be interested in. So keep thinking about the environment. Look at how these different companies are addressing the market and which direction they're moving in. And if you think you're not in that market, as Blockbuster did with Netflix, because Netflix is art house and foreign movies, you might be very surprised down the road. So again, layers, it's a nice way to get an understanding of the market, but be very careful where you see yourself. There is a lot of the expectations are crazy. I mean, it goes from 1 trillion to 13 trillion. I just put this up because you see it's like big numbers that obviously try to sell services. The question is also what are we really talking about? If I ask you how big is the internet, you would say, do you mean the infrastructure? Do you mean the devices? Do you mean the application sales? Or, well, technically, everything we do is now touched by the internet. So now we're talking gazillions. So it's very difficult to say if you have something like streets. What is the value of streets? It's just building the street, or also the commerce it's enabling. So I would be careful with the numbers. Nevertheless, it seems to be we're moving in a direction where it will be very big, although because of generative AI, the spotlight is a little bit off the metaverse. Keep in mind, though, that the metaverse and AI actually very go together very well and can reinforce each other. So, what is important if you think about those numbers is what are the assumptions? uh, what economic commercial assumption have been looked at. It also depends on general GDP. If we have a complete recession, the metaverse will develop more slowly than if we have boom times and everybody has a lot of money. What market segments and applications, how did those different market research company divvy it up? Uh, the verticals are defined in different ways, and you need to figure out where you are and what could affect you. And the entire the definition and the number of the entire layers, as I said before, simply differ. So do not take those numbers as gospel. That it might only indicate the direction it's going in. So, and here's something perhaps I I am very interested in technology, and I am obviously monitoring technology developments simply because it's part of where the signal of change are coming from. But I also want to highlight that a lot of the technologies really are not the companies that we think about. Amazon.com is not really, it has become, because of some applications, a technology company. It started out as a mail order service that used the internet. That was really not high tech. Yahoo was not an internet search engine. It was actually two guys cataloging what they found on the internet. Netflix started out with, sending, shipping back and forth packets of DVDs. There was really nothing technology enabled. Uh, Apple, and now people might rip me apart. I do not believe that the iPhone itself was the crucial, here's the device everybody's craving for. It's a great device, don't get me wrong, but there were other, the Trio handspring had certain um phones that looked very similar, had touch applications, could connect to the internet, but it was very difficult to get applications. What Apple, because they had iTunes, really leveraged was that infrastructure and put apps up there. That was not necessarily high tech. It was complicated to allow everybody to download the information, but in the end, it was a depository of applications, but it made the iPhone such a strong device because there's an app for that. That was essentially what it was said. But again, not necessary. Uber Technologies, Airbnb is an intermediary, and they use the internet, and Facebook was a posting site. So they started out very differently and then leveraged the new technology. It I would argue that they didn't necessarily start out as a technology company, perhaps leaving Apple at the side. But you see, think about it less about, oh, it's technology. Think more about, okay, so what does it mean? What does this environment do for my business, and what could the competition do with it? So in the end, what we'll have to see it. What will the metaverse become? So, what are the verticals and technologies that might emerge? Currently, it's clearly less about. It's still gaming. I mean, perhaps this is where it started. It's absolutely industrial applications. It is less about the world that Zuckerberg told us about 2 years ago. No, we're not going into virtual environments to interact with everybody. There are those efforts, and there are some of the applications. Rome is obviously using a great one where we can do that, but it has not become this massive market that people were talking about. Then, what effect will those immersive technologies have? Is it a fundamental transformation of the internet as we know it, or will it be a layer on top of it? This is important to just see yourself. Maybe you don't have to go full in. Maybe you just need to have certain applications that allow users of the metaverse to access your products and services. What will the ecosystem and the technology services look like? With whom will you have to partner in this environment to make it work? What markets will benefit and emerge? And I underscored the emerge because there are currently a lot of markets, and a lot of them will benefit. But similar to the internet, that was the easy part to see. Oh, maybe it's easier to actually send over a message if we have an internet. But the internet gave us so many new applications, new software, new business models that really nobody knew about the beginning of the 90s. And that's the same with the metaverse. Keep a tab on, use signals of change to understand how this is developing, what new applications are emerging, how people will react to it, how our societal and social behavior will change. And obviously, then what novel commercial opportunities will appear to give you a chance to use and leverage those opportunities for your business, but also to develop an understanding what competitors or what companies that you don't even perceive as competitors could use these opportunities to directly compete or overtake your own business. So, um, Here's a wide list of actually Rome's IMCI magazine. I wrote a lot about the information that I compiled here, obviously more in detail. So if you're interested in the empathy part, there's more information in those articles to get you an understanding what the metaverse could be and what my initial signals of change are. Um, in the end, if you're interested in this overall process to get from information from the external environment, initial changes, try to make sense of them, develop patterns, make it signals of change, potentially even go towards scenario planning to then make decisions that are very forward looking and take the element of surprise out of the marketplace, then there is the book Small Data, Big Disruptions that has a lot of additional examples where you will actually be able to understand how it all comes together and what the different aspects of weak signal detections are. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate that you took the time. I assume that Rome might jump in with some questions, comments, concerns.
Yes, there are a few questions in there. So let's get this thing out so we can continue here.
Perfect.
So, one question was how can companies develop a systematic approach to monitoring and analyzing weak signals?
That is a very good question. Actually, I spent a lot of time in my book to discuss this because it is very challenging. Two or three answers. So, first answer is the culture. Um, are you able to develop a culture that is open enough to have those signals of change? Then, if you have people who are interested, will you be able to put it to research and development, or is it more that it should be part of strategic um, development? And finally, do you want to start maybe on a low level, look at providers of signals of change that can be for free? My system broke down. Rome, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know where it broke down. So in any case, and then the question of the first is the culture change. Make your company open to thinking about signals of change. Where do you want to have this uh, scanning function? Do you want to have it at the top strategic level, or is it part of marketing? And finally, you can start with just looking at certain magazines that highlight those signals of change. Some consultancies actually provide signals of change for free. Then you can also purchase services. And finally, you can develop your own team as Business Finland. So I'm part of the Business Finland foresight team, which then becomes a much more focused approach in that we understand what Business Finland is looking for, so we can put it into context. So it really depends on how much resources you have. Perhaps just start on a low level to develop a feeling before you spend a lot of money.
Okay, a different kind of question here is how do you prioritize weak signals and determine which ones actually require further investigations and which ones don't?
This would go back to the impact emergence chart where you have people from inside your company, let's say from operations, marketing, finance, customer service, and so on, and they would look at what is a potential impact for our business, and that would put it into a low or high category? And then also, is this something that's currently going on or something that could happen over the next coming years that essentially spreads it out? And if you have something that's high impact and is currently going on, that's your prioritization right there. In a perfect world, you would already work on it, but perhaps you missed something. I need to stress that you want to have not only people from strategy, but also customer service, um, operations, everybody in your company, because there might be something you need the marketing person in the room to say, this is very high impact for us, because the person on the factory floor might have completely different thoughts and not even realize that there is an impact to the company.
Okay, a different
Diversity
kind.
of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
It's a diversity of thought. It's the diversity of thought to get the information inside the company. It's also the diversity of thought to make sense of these weak signals of change.
Okay, so a different question was, any recommendations about how to ensure leadership understands the importance and will fund the gathering of weak signals to analyze? I mean, should be its own key initiative or in budget dollars, or should it be the R&D or marketing operating budget? So
So
where would the money come from?
I'm afraid that the person who asked this question actually encountered already the issue, because it's a very good question. Um, you have in general, that's in a way, this is what I meant with the culture change of an organization. So if you have, and again, the details are in the book, but if you put something inside market research, then it is at a place where it kind of belongs, because you already have the information pathways, but quantitative and qualitative market research can actually collide. If you put it at the strategic level, the argument is this is the place where it really should be. But people at that level will say, well, how much time do I spend on these weak signals of change while I'm actually, working with real concerns that I have because I don't know, the factory in Asia burned down and now we need to find replacement. So you can see that suddenly the ROI becomes the overwhelming issue. Problematically, y- you, it's not that you can measure the return on the investment, because everybody will claim that that new development was because they had the insight, not because of foresight. It's more the other way around. How much money? What is the worst case scenario if you miss a certain development? And that is very difficult to quantify, because in a lot of cases it means you go out of business, like Blockbuster. But this is not necessarily how our system works. We think in terms of what is the additional value, not what is the value that gets protected. So in the end, it really comes down to, if you want to be honest, to find a group of people who believe in the system. If you find those people on the highest level, great, awesome. But even if you find them at middle management or lower management level, you can build up a team to then feed new ideas, new concerns into the company and develop and nurture the idea of horizon scanning on foresight over time. I have to say, I've done this for 25 years. The idea of foresight and horizon scanning is not as crazy anymore as it was 25 years ago. And I think that's in part because the world has changed so rapidly, so quickly, that enough companies have missed crucial developments. So there is more understanding that somebody needs to look at the outside. Good question though.
Oh, right. So that was actually the last question. So, Martin, thank you so very much for your insights and the class today.
Anytime. I truly enjoy working with you and with your audience. Again, obviously, contact Rome if there are additional questions. I will be around because I really enjoy engaging with your audience. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much, folks. We're going to take a short break and then we're going to come back with dev deeds. So stay tuned.